Omar al-Maktoum had everything: wealth, power, and a life built on privilege, until his forbidden affair with Lina Santos, a humble Filipina maid, turned into a deadly secret buried beneath the sands of Dubai. The mansion of the al-Maktoum family stood on the edge of Dubai's elite district, a fortress of luxury hidden behind tall white walls and guarded gates. The sunlight reflected off the marble exterior, and fountains danced in perfect rhythm across the courtyard. Every inch of the property screamed perfection: ornate chandeliers, imported Italian furniture, and corridors lined with gold-framed portraits of ancestors who had built an empire from desert sand. Yet, beneath this beauty lingered an unsettling silence, a silence that carried secrets too heavy to be spoken aloud. The family's fortune came from oil, high-end real estate, and a chain of international hotels that bore their name in shining letters. To the outside world, the al-Maktoums were symbols of success and pride, a family that represented the new face of Dubai's wealth. But those who worked inside the mansion knew another side. They had seen the whispers, the hidden arguments, and the fear that lived quietly among the staff. Orders were absolute, mistakes unforgiven, and loyalty was rewarded only with silence. At the center of it all was the billionaire patriarch, Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum, a man of power and discipline who demanded obedience from everyone around him. His wife, Madame Aisha, ruled the household with equal control, her word as final as her husband's. And then there was their only son, Omar, handsome, reckless, and untouchable. He was known across Dubai's social circles as a man who could have anything he desired, yet his eyes often carried a restlessness that money could not satisfy. Inside this golden palace, where image mattered more than truth, something dark was beginning to stir, something that would soon shatter the illusion of perfection forever. Lina Santos arrived in Dubai on a hot afternoon, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a photograph of her parents. She had left behind the crowded streets of Manila and the tiny house she shared with her mother, hoping to find a better life working as a maid. When she was driven through the golden gates of the Al Maktoum mansion, she could hardly believe her eyes. Everything looked unreal: the shimmering pool, the polished floors, the fragrance of expensive perfumes floating through the air. She told herself that this was the opportunity she had prayed for. In the beginning, life inside the mansion seemed peaceful. Lina's job was to clean the upper floors, prepare breakfast trays, and keep the rooms spotless. She worked silently, always careful not to disturb the family's privacy. Madame Aisha noticed her obedience and began to trust her, often asking her to assist with delicate household tasks. The other maids liked her kindness, saying she had a gentle soul and never complained, no matter how long the hours were. But soon Lina began to notice things that unsettled her: the strict rules, the fear in the servants' eyes whenever the sheik entered a room, and the unspoken tension that surrounded the family's only son, Omar. He was polite at first, distant yet curious. Sometimes Lina caught him watching her quietly from the balcony or asking unnecessary questions about her work. She tried to avoid his gaze, but his attention made her uneasy. In a house filled with wealth and power, she was invisible to everyone except him. What started as harmless interest soon grew into something neither of them could control, setting in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Omar Al Maktoum had always been the center of attention in Dubai's elite circles. With his designer suits, luxury cars, and effortless charm, he lived the life of a prince who feared nothing. But inside the walls of his father's mansion, his freedom was an illusion. His every move was watched, his choices criticized, and his failures hidden under a blanket of family control. The pressure to uphold the family's honor was constant, leaving him restless and seeking distraction in the shadows of his own home. That distraction soon appeared in the form of Lina Santos. At first, it was nothing more than curiosity. Omar noticed her quiet presence as she moved through the halls, her head lowered, her manner respectful. She was unlike the women he met at parties: humble, shy, and untouched by luxury. The contrast intrigued him. He began finding excuses to speak to her, to linger near the rooms where she worked. Sometimes he left small gifts in places she would find: a bracelet, a note, or perfume. She tried to return them, but he always insisted. Her resistance only fueled his fascination. Lena's heart filled with fear and confusion. She knew the danger of being noticed by a man like him. Still, she couldn't deny the strange warmth she felt under his gaze. The mansion's quiet corners became their secret world, where glances spoke louder than words. It was a forbidden connection born out of loneliness and power imbalance. What Omar saw as love, Lena saw as a dangerous mistake, but it was already too late. The line between desire and destruction had blurred, and beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Almac town estate, a secret affair had taken root, one that could never be allowed to exist. Weeks passed quietly, but the air inside the mansion began to shift. Lena became distant, her usual calm replaced by anxiety. The once simple rhythm of her work was broken by waves of dizziness and exhaustion she could no longer hide. She started wearing looser clothes, hoping no one would notice the small changes in her body. But every passing day made the truth harder to conceal. Deep down, she already knew. She was carrying Omar's child. The realization brought no joy, only fear that gripped her every waking moment. At night, she lay awake in her small room, listening to the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of the sea outside the walls. She thought of her family back home, of how they would never understand what she had done. Her dreams of helping her mother escape poverty were now overshadowed by a growing secret that could destroy her. Lena knew what happened to women in her position, how easily they were silenced or sent away. Omar, on the other hand, was torn between panic and denial. He avoided Lena for days, then returned with promises he couldn't keep. He swore he would protect her, but his words were empty. The weight of his family's name pressed heavily on him. A scandal like this could ruin everything: their reputation, his inheritance, and his father's pride. Lena's fear deepened when Madame Aisha began watching her more closely. The older woman's sharp eyes noticed everything: the trembling hands, the sudden sickness, the way Lena avoided mirrors. It was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced, and when it did, no one in that mansion would be ready for the storm it would unleash. The morning that changed everything began quietly. The sun poured through the mansion's high windows, casting golden light across polished marble floors. Madame Aisha sat in the dining hall, sipping her tea when she noticed Lena walking past. Something about the maid's pale face and careful steps caught her attention. Her sharp eyes followed Lena until she disappeared behind a corner. That small moment planted a seed of suspicion that refused to fade. By afternoon, her instincts had turned into certainty. When the family doctor arrived for his weekly visit, Madame Aisha asked him to check on the staff, claiming it was a routine health inspection. Hours later, he returned with the truth she already expected but didn't want to hear. Lena was pregnant. The words struck her like a knife. The doctor, understanding the danger of his revelation, said nothing more and left quietly. Aisha sat still for a long time, staring into space, her expression cold and unreadable. Inside her mind, outrage and fear collided. This wasn't just a maid's mistake, it was a stain on her family's name. She thought of her husband's temper, of the journalists who followed their every move, and of the whispers that could destroy years of carefully built respect. She didn't confront Omar or Lena that day. Instead, she locked herself in her private room, where she made a silent decision. Before sunset, she ordered a family meeting to be held in her husband's office. Her face betrayed no emotion as she instructed the guards to ensure no staff left the mansion that night. The Golden Palace had turned into a cage, and behind its silent walls, the fate of one terrified maid was about to be sealed forever. That evening, the grand study of Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum became the stage for a family reckoning. The heavy doors were shut, the curtains drawn, and the air inside was tense with unspoken rage. The sheik sat behind his mahogany desk, his face stern and unreadable. Beside him, Madame Aisha sat perfectly composed, her expression sharp enough to cut through the silence. Omar entered last, his steps hesitant, his confidence stripped away. He could feel the weight of his parents' eyes on him before a single word was spoken. The father broke the silence first. His voice was calm, but carried a force that made the room tremble. The truth had reached him from his wife's lips, and it was far worse than he had imagined. His only son, the heir to their empire, had brought shame upon their name by impregnating a servant. For a man like Sheikh Rashid, who built his reputation on control, power, and respect, This was more than betrayal. It was humiliation. Madame Aisha demanded action, her tone colder than her husband's. She insisted the situation be erased before it reached the ears of the media or the royal circles they associated with. The sheik agreed. No scandal could touch their name, no matter the cost. He forbade any contact between Omar and the maid and warned that hesitation would destroy them all. Omar sat frozen, the reality of their decision sinking in. He wanted to beg, to explain, but he knew it was useless. The conversation wasn't about right or wrong. It was about preservation. As the meeting ended, a silent agreement was made. Lena would disappear, and the family's secret would vanish with her. The wheels of destruction had begun to turn. The night that sealed Lena's fate was quiet and windless, the kind of night when even the city seemed to hold its breath. After the tense family meeting, Omar was summoned to his father's private study once more. The room smelled faintly of oud and cigar smoke, symbols of his father's authority. Sheikh Rashid sat in his chair, his expression carved from stone. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. Instead, he spoke slowly, his words heavy and deliberate. The honor of the Al Maktoum family had been stained, and only Omar could cleanse it. There would be no scandal, no whisper of disgrace, and no child to remind the world of his weakness. Omar's throat went dry as the meaning sank in. His father wasn't simply demanding silence. He was demanding sacrifice. The idea of harming Lena filled him with dread, yet he knew resistance was impossible. Defying his father meant exile, perhaps even death. The family's code was older than law and stronger than love. To them, honor was everything. When Omar left the study, his mother was waiting outside, calm and composed. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch soft but chilling. She didn't speak, yet her silence carried the same message as his father's order. There would be no mercy. Later that night, Omar sat alone in his car, staring at the mansion's towering gates. Memories of Lena's laughter and her trusting eyes haunted him. He tried to imagine a way out, but every path led back to the same end. The clock struck midnight, and he knew there was no escape. Somewhere deep inside, his conscience screamed, but his fear was louder. The decision had been made, and tomorrow, Lena's story would end. The following evening, Omar visited the servants' quarters for the first time in days. Lena was sitting on her bed, her suitcase half-packed, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. When she saw him standing in the doorway, relief and confusion crossed her face. He looked different, tired, nervous, and strangely gentle. He told her in a calm voice that he had arranged for her safe departure. Everything, he said, would be handled discreetly. She could leave the country before anyone found out, and he promised to send money later to help her start a new life. Lena wanted to believe him. The thought of escaping the mansion filled her with desperate hope. She imagined herself returning home, holding her baby in her mother's arms, far away from the cruel whispers of the wealthy. She asked no questions when Omar told her to be ready after midnight. His tone carried authority, the same power she had feared from the beginning. She gathered her few belongings, the worn photograph of her parents, a small gold cross, and the folded ultrasound picture of her unborn child. When the house fell silent, Omar led her outside through the servants' entrance. The night was unusually still, and the desert wind brushed against their faces as they walked to his car. Lena clutched her bag tightly, her heart pounding with mixed fear and relief. Omar kept his eyes forward, saying nothing. He told himself this was mercy, that he was sparing her a worse fate. But deep inside, he knew he was lying, to her and to himself. The drive ahead would not lead to freedom. It would lead to a lonely stretch of desert where promises would turn into betrayal, and hope would meet its cruelest end. The highway stretched endlessly under the pale glow of the moon as Omar drove through the sleeping city. The silence inside the car was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine and Lena's quiet breathing from the back seat. She sat nervously clutching her small bag, unaware that every mile took her farther from safety. The tall skyscrapers of Dubai soon disappeared in the rearview mirror, replaced by empty roads and vast stretches of sand that seemed to swallow the horizon. Lena tried to stay calm, convincing herself this was the path to freedom. Omar had promised to send her away quietly. She wanted to believe that promise with all her heart. But Omar's mind was a storm. His father's words echoed in his ears, commanding him to act. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white, his chest heavy with guilt. The road signs became fewer, the air colder, and the sky darker. When he finally turned off the main road, the car rolled into an abandoned construction site surrounded by sand dunes. The headlights illuminated rusted machinery and broken concrete pillars, silent witnesses to what was about to happen. Lena sensed something was wrong. Her voice trembled as she asked where they were. Omar didn't answer. He stepped out, leaving the engine running, his heartbeat pounding so loudly it drowned out reason. Lena followed hesitantly, fear rising inside her like a warning. The night air was eerily still, and the vast desert stretched in every direction, empty and merciless. Omar could barely look at her. Every step he took toward her felt heavier than the last. Somewhere between love and terror, his humanity began to crumble. In that desolate silence, the point of no return had arrived. The desert was quiet, the kind of silence that felt alive, pressing against the skin like a warning. The moon hung low over the dunes, casting a silver glow on the sand. Omar stood motionless beside the car, his heart hammering in his chest. Lena looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes, clutching her small bag as if it could protect her. She called his name softly, confusion trembling in her voice, but there was no answer. The man who once promised to save her now looked like a stranger, his face pale, his eyes distant, his mind lost somewhere between guilt and obedience. In his pocket, he carried a small object given to him by one of the guards, a silent reminder of his father's command. Every second felt endless as he fought with himself, torn between the voice of his conscience and the weight of his family's expectations. The desert wind rose suddenly, swirling sand around them as if nature itself sensed what was about to happen. Lena took a step back, her instincts screaming for her to run, but it was too late. Omar's trembling hands moved before his mind could stop them. The sound that followed echoed through the emptiness, a single moment of horror swallowed instantly by the endless desert. When it was over, Omar dropped to his knees, gasping for breath, unable to face what he had done. He buried her beneath the cold sand with his bare hands, his tears mixing with the dust. By the time the first light of dawn began to touch the sky, there was no sign of her, only silence and a man whose soul had been forever broken. As he drove away, the desert kept its secret, at least for now. The next morning, the mansion returned to its usual rhythm of quiet luxury. Breakfast was served, the gardens were trimmed, and the maids went about their work as if nothing had changed. Yet something was different, an absence that hung in the air like a shadow. Lena's bed was untouched, her cleaning supplies neatly arranged, and her small rosary still lay on the table beside it. When she failed to appear for her morning duties, the other maids grew uneasy. They whispered among themselves, wondering if she had fallen ill or been sent away in secret. By noon, the head housekeeper noticed her absence and reported it to Madame Aisha. The response was swift and cold. Lena, she claimed, had been dismissed during the night and sent back to her country. Her tone left no room for questions. The staff nodded, but unease rippled through them. Lena had left without collecting her wages, without saying goodbye, and without even taking the few belongings she kept close to her heart. Something felt terribly wrong. Days passed, and rumors began to spread beyond the mansion's walls. Some of the other Filipino workers in nearby villas noticed Lena's sudden disappearance and started asking questions. Her friends tried calling her phone, but it went unanswered. When one of them contacted the agency that had brought her to Dubai, they were told there was no record of her departure. Eventually, concern turned into panic. A missing person report was filed with the Dubai police by one of her relatives back home, who hadn't heard from her in weeks. The family mansion remained silent, guarded as ever, but whispers of suspicion had already started to leak into the city that prized secrecy above all else. When the Dubai police received the missing person report, they began their investigation quietly. At first, it seemed like just another case of a domestic worker who had fled her job, but as detectives looked closer, the details didn't add up. Lena's passport had not been used to exit the country, and her salary remained unclaimed. The agency confirmed she had no known relatives in Dubai, making her sudden disappearance deeply suspicious. A search was launched, discreet but thorough, as authorities knew the Al Maktoum family's influence reached far and deep. The investigation started with interviews. The household staff appeared nervous, answering questions with rehearsed precision. They repeated the same story, that Lena had left suddenly, sent back to the Philippines after a disagreement. But their eyes told another story. Some of them looked terrified, others regretful. Detectives noticed inconsistencies in the timelines, missing CCTV footage and altered attendance logs. The mansion's security system, usually flawless, showed a blackout period that conveniently matched the night Lena vanished. When Omar was questioned, he played the role of the concerned employer. He claimed Lena had been caught stealing jewelry and was dismissed immediately. His calm tone and family name made it difficult for investigators to challenge him directly. Still, small clues began to surface. Unrecorded trips on his car's GPS, traces of sand on his tires, and a phone signal that placed Lena's mobile far from the city on the night she disappeared. Though no direct evidence yet linked Omar to her fate, suspicion had taken root. The detectives, bound by duty but aware of the family's power, continued their work in silence. What had begun as a missing person case was slowly turning into something darker, something that could shatter one of Dubai's most respected families. Weeks passed with no progress, and the case seemed destined to fade into silence, until nature itself intervened. A powerful sandstorm swept across the outskirts of the city, uncovering what had been buried beneath the shifting dunes. A construction worker, returning to the abandoned site after the storm, noticed something pale protruding from the sand. When he moved closer, he realized it was human remains. The police were called immediately, and within hours, the site was surrounded by officers and forensic teams. The discovery shocked investigators. The location matched the last signal from Lena's phone weeks earlier. As they dug carefully through the sand, they found fragments of clothing, a small gold cross, and a bracelet engraved with the initials LS. The remains were transported to the forensic lab, where DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. It was Lena Santos. The news spread quickly through police circles, but was kept from the public at first. Detectives pieced together the evidence, connecting her last known movements to Omar's car, which had traces of the same soil found at the burial site. Surveillance footage from nearby roads, long overlooked, captured his vehicle heading toward the desert on the night Lena disappeared. The timeline fit perfectly. Quietly, a warrant was prepared. The authorities knew this case would ignite outrage if exposed too soon, so every move was made carefully. Lena's death was no longer a rumor, it was a fact. The question now was who would bear the blame. Deep inside the Al Maktoum mansion, Omar began to sense the walls closing in. What he thought was buried forever had been dragged back into the light, and the truth was about to destroy everything his family had tried to protect. When Omar was finally arrested, it happened quietly, but not secretly. The Dubai police arrived at the Al Maktoum mansion before dawn, their flashing lights cutting through the early morning fog. Guards tried to resist, but the officers carried official orders. The family patriarch, Sheikh Rashid, watched from the balcony in stunned silence as his only son was handcuffed and led away. Within hours, the story leaked to the press, and the scandal that the Al Maktoums had tried so desperately to bury exploded across international headlines. News channels broadcast the story of the murdered Filipina Maid around the world. Human rights organizations demanded justice, and social media filled with outrage. The image of the young heir, once celebrated for his wealth and charm, was now tied to one of Dubai's darkest crimes. The government, under pressure from both the public and international observers, assured that the investigation would be fair and transparent, no matter how powerful the accused was. Inside prison, Omar was no longer the privileged son of a billionaire. The silence of his cell was heavy, broken only by his own thoughts. He replayed that night in his mind endlessly, haunted by Lena's face and the sound of the wind over the dunes. His parents tried to contain the damage through lawyers and influence, but the evidence was overwhelming: DNA on the remains, the car tracking data, and the lies he had told investigators. The Al Maktoum empire began to fracture. Investors withdrew, business partners distanced themselves, and once loyal allies vanished. The family's name, once associated with power and prestige, was now a symbol of cruelty and disgrace. For the first time, their wealth could not buy silence. The truth had finally conquered the illusion. The courtroom was silent when Omar Al Maktoum was brought in, dressed in a plain beige prison uniform instead of his usual tailored suit. Cameras clicked as journalists from across the world filled the seats, eager to witness the fall of a man born into unimaginable privilege. The prosecution presented its case with precision: GPS records, forensic evidence, and testimonies from terrified servants who finally broke their silence. The story unfolded piece by piece, exposing how a moment of fear and pride had ended two innocent lives. The courtroom that once feared his family's name now looked at Omar with contempt. When the verdict was read, the silence was broken only by the judge's voice. Omar was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The decision was final. There would be no escape, no negotiation, and no redemption. His parents sat motionless, their faces pale with shock. Years of power and wealth could not protect them from the shame that now defined their legacy. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered holding photos of Lina Santos. Her story had become a symbol of justice for exploited workers everywhere. The Filipino community mourned her, not just as a victim, but as a reminder of countless others whose voices were never heard. Lina's body was flown home to the Philippines, where her mother waited at the small airport with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. The coffin was simple, covered with white flowers and a small cross. As it was lowered into the ground, the wind carried soft prayers through the trees. Justice had been served, but peace came slowly. The desert that once hid her truth had given it back to the world, proving that even the most powerful cannot bury guilt forever.